Hi, mecci here again from Plato's Cave and Shiny Side Out. Sorry about the croaky voice. Okay, transmitting to you from the bunker underneath Denver Airport. That's not true. I'm inside Mount Shasta. That's not true either. No, I'm somewhere in Shambhala in Nepal. That's also a lie. I'm in Sydney, Australia. That's the truth. There you go. Okay. Why am I posting so soon again? I want to clarify a few things for everybody's illumination, let's call it. And then the key thing to understand is that we're in an extremely critical period in human history. What we're seeing today, and have been seeing for a while, but it actually has escalated now, are the same conditions that existed prior to World War I and prior to World War II. Let me explain. Prior to World War I, we had two great powers in competition with one another. One great power that was on the decline and one great power that was on the rise. The power in decline was Great Britain, and the power on the rise was Germany. Great Britain had been ruling the seas for the better part of 300 years, ever since the defeat of the Spanish Armada by weather. They had an empire that pretty much spanned the globe. The sun never set on the British Empire, as they famously said. And Germany had just been created, in the 1860s. It didn't really exist as a country, as a nation. And, so they now sort of tried to play catch-up with the other European powers, such as Spain, France, and most definitely Great Britain, that had established colonies across the world, etc., etc. So the Germans rushed to create those colonies, to build a fleet, etc., etc. But there was this friction between Germany and Great Britain specifically. What they also had was a lot of secret treaties, which was chaotic as well, no good. So that was the situation before World War I. It was also a time of technological change. This massive upheaval. Industrialization had now actually gone and infiltrated the military, right? New inventions like barbed wire, the machine gun, heavier than air flight, things like that had recently come on the military market, much to the chagrin of the old generals who still pretty much fought in the way that the 17th and 18th century warriors fought. And cavalry was, of course, the most prized possession of any of those generals. Okay, so the conflict between the two great powers, right? What also happened, new ideologies were on the rise, right? Social movements which had been brought about, one could say, given birth to by industrialization, such as the union movement, socialism, communism, right? And things like that. And it was really for the first time that fascism made an appearance, because fascism is really grounded in the idea of corporate or industrial based power that is then trying to spread its influence into the government sectors, right? And then don't forget, back then it was a time of empires, not a lot of democracies about. Okay, it was still kings and queens and emperors and so forth, and it was a very different kind of world. Stable though, it had been stable for quite some time. No big wars. I mean, there was, but nothing catastrophic. I mean, the 30 Years War of 1618 to 1648 had led to a lot of the European powers to conduct war in a more civilized manner, right? So, because that 30 Years War really shook Europe to the core, as well as the advances of the Ottoman Empire into Europe. Okay, so that's World War I, right? So the two powers struggling and a lot of secret treaties, and this is quite unstable. New ideologies, new ways of thinking came about as well. So, and then we had World War II, and many people would say that World War II was born directly out of World War I, and that is absolutely true. Without World War I, there would not have been a World War II. I'm not going to talk about that right now, that will go too far. But what happened before World War II was a failure of the League of Nations. Essentially, it was a body that had no power. America decided to isolate itself from the rest of the world. It did not become part of the League of Nations, right? So it was left like, you Europeans do what you want, don't care. right? America for Americans, thank you very much. Not really interested. Okay, Germany had been decimated by the Treaty of Versailles, which many people blame for World War II as well. A dreadful treaty, which left Germany pretty much bankrupt. And high unemployment, high uncertainty in the streets. Again, opposing ideologies, fighting in the streets, communism, social nationalism as well. Nazism is actually social nationalism, for all those interested. Communism, socialism, and in all forms, liberalism. It was a time, I guess, of new political structures. Okay, the Weimar Republic was weak; it was failing as well. Hindenburg was a relic of a bygone age, and he, chose to align himself with Hitler in government. But that's again not really necessary to go into here. But suffice it to say, there was a crisis, a global economic crisis, the Great Depression. There were extreme weather events, the Great Dust Bowl of America, you might recall that. The Grapes of Wrath and all that, right? You may be familiar with that period of time in the United States. And it was also a time of nation states rediscovering their, I guess, nationalistic tendencies, the undercurrent of nationalism. It was a time of great uncertainty after the wars. People were unemployed. As I said, there were economic crises, and it was just not a stable environment at all. And eventually, League of Nations failed entirely, and Germany left it. America had never been part of it, and it sort of the entire system broke down. Interestingly enough, the Allies, or the former Allies in World War I, now pursued something called appeasement. They all felt bad, especially the English, that Germany had been treated so poorly at or in the Treaty of Versailles, and they let Hitler do what he wanted, more or less. Hitler said, we really should take the other side of the Rhine back, the Rhine River. And he said to his troops, you go across the bridge, any sign of resistance, any sign of opposition, you turn right back and you forget about it. He didn't encounter any resistance, and so his troops marched into the French-occupied part of Germany there on the Rhine River, where I'm from, incidentally. All right, Sudetenland. There's lots of Germans there. It's part of Czechoslovakia, but, really, a lot of Germans, so I think they should be allowed to get back in there. All right, so that happened. Austria, Heimensreich, that happened. So off they went, all right? And it only started falling apart, I guess, more or less, when Hitler invaded Poland. Okay. Now, let's not forget how Hitler got into power. This is important for a future projection into what might happen in our coming years. He staged the burning of the parliamentary building, the Reichstag in Germany, and blamed it on the communists. And funnily enough, the first people in the concentration camps were Bueller. That's right, communists. Not Jews, not gays. Communists were the first people in the concentration camps. So, what happened? He declared a national emergency and essentially elevated himself to supreme leader of Germany, which a title and position and powers which he never surrendered until his supposed death in 1945. And that's a whole different other story, and I'm not entirely sure that he died, but it doesn't really matter at this point. So these are the situations between World War I and World War II. And it was also a time of change in the sense that prior to World War I, it was an age of empires, right? It was truly the age of empires. It had been that way for hundreds of years. Relative stability, everybody knew pretty much where they stood. But like I said, the upstart nation of Germany tried to sort of upset the apple cart a little there. And then, prior to World War II, most of the empires had perished in World War I. Okay, the only empires that really remained were the Japanese Empire, the British Empire, and you could argue the Chinese Empire, but that was also going the way of the dodo with the rise of Mao and the defeat of the Kuomintang, which then eventually fled to Formosa, which is now called Taiwan. Okay, but no more empires. So what we saw after World War II then was a completely new world order, right? So you've got the world order before World War One, which was the Age of Empires. Then you've got the fragmented, chaotic, and I would say highly conflict-ridden area between the wars, between World War II and World War One, right? So about 30 odd years, which were highly chaotic. And then, of course, after World War II, that saw the end of all the empires as political entities, as consequential political entities, right? That came to an end. And for the last 80 years, we've been living in the post-World War II world, which has been extremely stable for the Western world, right? Not for the rest of the planet, but for the Western world, it was very, very stable. So, what's happening then in the world today? In the world today, we're living through an age of extreme uncertainty, okay? We've just had a major financial crisis in 2008, a redistribution of wealth like we have never seen before. The banking system failed, and I also say at this point that democracy as well as capitalism died in 2008. Because capitalism says very clearly, like, if if you can't compete in the open market, then you should fail. Something else should replace you. That's not what happened. The government, in fact, bailed out the banks. Okay, and that's what I like to call corporate fascism or neo-feudalism. I don't really care, but I think corporate fascism is probably the best way to describe it at this point, because that money was never paid back. The banks took the money, thank you very much, and paid themselves huge bonuses, while a million households in America alone were foreclosed, with the crisis costing the American taxpayer in the vicinity of $1 trillion. There's a really great article by Rolling Stone around this if you want to go and have a look at that. That's all true. Funnily enough, toward the end of World War One, there was a massive global pandemic, the Spanish flu, misnamed. Didn't start in Spain, started up in Scandinavia, but that's neither here nor there. And then, of course, we had the COVID epidemic, which some people believe was a plandemic, but it doesn't matter either. But it was almost exactly 100 years later, there was another global pandemic. And it's almost like history wants to repeat itself. It's really crazy. 9/11 ushered in a completely new era in world politics. In a similar way that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand ushered in a new era, in the same way that the burning of the Reichstag in Germany ushered in a completely new era. Short-lived though it was. And 9/11 really did do that for the world. Everything changed after 9/11. The world was a completely different place. And now what we've got in our current situation, if you look at World War One and World War II, what I just described, you've got a declining power and a rising power. And you could argue there are many rising powers, but there are two very distinct powers that are in conflict with each other, and that's America, the United States of America, and China, the People's Republic of China, not Taiwan. And China is on the rise, and America is in decline. I'm not going to argue the point, because that's the truth. It's what it is, and America is struggling mightily against it. So, that's one of the conditions. Like I said, economically, yes, there are many crises that happen, and one was just as bad as the Great Depression in many ways. But, having said that, America is now in a position, and this is important because America is the strongest economy in the world still. America is in a position now where it will never ever be able to get out of debt. Never. It will never come out of debt. It's not possible for America to ever pay down the debt. In fact, now the debt is so high that servicing the debt is the single biggest item in its budget. Servicing the debt is now the single biggest item in its budget. It can never pay down the debt. It will never ever happen. And who is the money owed to? Well, largely to Japan. Japan and China. Believe it or not, it's true. Funny enough. But, so that's what's happening, right? And we have now a president, or you have, I should say, because I'm Australian, so good luck to me. You have a president that doesn't understand history. He doesn't understand geopolitics. He doesn't even seem to understand economics. And that's what I find really worrying. You know, when I look at these tariffs and I look at the things he's trying to do, and he's threatening now, which is hilarious. He's threatening now to invade Canada, Greenland, and he also wants to retake the Panama Canal. Now, the Panama Canal, out of all these things, the Panama Canal makes the most sense to me, right? Because it was owned by the United States at some point, and until Jimmy Carter gave it back. But that one I get it. I get why you want to do that, but why would you want to alienate Canada and Greenland, or Denmark for that matter, or the Europeans in general? Not only that, but we're now seeing the collapse of NATO. When I say collapse as far as the Americans are concerned, because the United States are very much withdrawing from it, in my opinion. They're withdrawing from the world stage at large, which is what they did between the wars as well, between World War I and World War II. They decided, no more, thank you very much, you do what you want. Right? But bear in mind, the structure we have lived under these last 80 years was specifically created by the Americans to foster a place of stability and to create an alliance, if you will, against what they perceive to be the Russian or the communist threat out of the Soviet Union. Okay, so this world that was there for 80 years was an American creation completely. On the western side, on the eastern side, this was a creation of the Soviet Union, of course. But they were all, I guess, responding to each other in many ways. Anyway, so what we also have is an extremely volatile situation with many other fires burning. And interestingly enough, what is happening with Russia and Putin now echoes very much what's happened to Hitler prior to World War II. This appeasement. We know we're not really doing anything to stop him. We're not actually opening up a proper war theater against Putin in the Ukraine. There's support and such from the West, but there's no boots on the ground officially, right? And then before that, we let Putin do whatever he wanted, really. Chechnya and other places. It's almost a joke now that people are suffering from the Russian defenestration virus, right? If you're in opposition to Putin, chances are you're going to fall out of the window. That seems to be catching. So that's hilarious. And there are a lot of things happening that are really worrying, right? And you seem to have a compromised president as well, because it is clear to me now, and for the longest time, I thought that Epstein. I'm sorry, I'm sort of going off track a little here, but for the longest time, I thought Jeffrey Epstein, was working for Mossad, gathering information, compromising people, etc., for future use. And I still think he did work for them, but I'm not convinced that he also worked for. I guess the equivalent of what is now the KGB, I guess the FSB maybe, but yeah, for Putin. And then when he was suicided, because there's no way he actually committed suicide, the bone that he broke in his neck he can't break by himself. Okay, it's not possible. It's physically not possible. But that's neither here nor there. Epstein did not commit suicide. Anyway, when that happened, I realized that okay. We now have his files, his video files or whatever they might be, somewhere, okay, sitting somewhere. And then I looked at what happened to Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and how Elon Musk and Putin were very close, shared a lot of phone conversations prior to Elon jumping ship and supporting Trump. Before that, Elon did not support Donald Trump, in fact hated him a lot, and was very derogative in his statements about him. But then he decided, I'm going to buck him up and give him, I'm giving him close to $300 million worth of support in his campaign, etc., etc. And Donald Trump gave him unprecedented access. Now you can ask yourself why? Because Putin asked him to. Putin asked Trump to give Elon all of that access because Elon Musk allied himself with Putin. I've got no doubt about that in my mind. From a business point of view, it makes perfect sense both for Putin and for Elon Musk. So you saw that. But critically, Putin has the goods on Donald Trump. All the Epstein videos and whatever else, maybe recordings, I have no idea, but it is significant because you will never see, ever, Donald Trump will do nothing serious that will affect Putin. Vladimir Putin is untouchable. If you haven't figured it out by now, then you have been living under a rock. And going forward, there's nothing that's going to happen in that space. Vladimir Putin will be left completely unmolested by the United States as long as Donald Trump is president. 100%. I've got no doubt. Now, what you also have is, so that was ongoing in the Ukraine, and if by now you're not convinced that Putin has no regard for anyone, the loss of almost 1 million Russian soldiers, both wounded and killed, should give you some pause, because if you're willing to do that to your own people, then just imagine what you're willing to do to everybody else, right? So that's happening. Similarly, we're now looking at massive challenges in the Middle East. From the day it started, I thought that the Netanyahu government's final plan was to depopulate Gaza, or at the very least get all the Palestinians out of Gaza, and this is exactly what they're doing. And now they've said it, and I've said this from when the conflict started. I'm not going to go into why or how it all started in October. I've got a whole bunch of my own theories about how this actually happened, and I find it astounding that one of the most, if not the most, astute intelligence apparatus in the world, the Mossad and all the other agencies that are at home in Israel, completely missed that attack or the preparations for it. I find this astounding. Similar to what happened in 9/11. In my opinion, another deliberate failure. But that's neither here nor there. And yeah, and people always say, "Oh, but Mecci, that's crazy." People would, like Netanyahu and George Bush, then they would never kill their own people. Yeah, hilarious. I find people that say that hilarious. Why? Because of course they would. People like that send other people in harm's way every day. Every day. They've got no qualms about killing the enemies, and they've got no qualms about killing their own people either, to be clear. So, no, I'm sorry. I think, yeah, look, I'm not going to go into this here, but there's, but the problem is, of course, now we're at a crossroads. It's an extremely volatile situation. And a lot of parallels can be drawn, like I said, with the situations prior to World War I and prior to World War II, which are exacerbated by a US president who seems to be completely incompetent and only able to focus on a very limited set of parameters, right? Normally, that doesn't matter, because the president has a whole bunch of advisors and people that actually know what they're doing. But in this administration, the few people that know what they're doing, for some reason, seem to have completely abdicated any common sense, and the people that are left have no idea. I don't know why people that used to be anchor people at Fox News were chosen, except maybe because they've got good hair, something which I clearly don't, but that's again not helping anyone. But no, I mean, I look at these people and what they're doing, and it boggles the mind, and even the lies that are being told. And I'm not saying that anyone is better. I'm neither for the Republicans nor the Democrats. I think creepy Joe Biden was no better. Okay, I've got my I'm probably a libertarian at heart, if anything, but any system that has two parties, one in opposition and one, I guess, in power, any of those systems, they're no longer relevant. We have to get rid of them. We can no longer afford to have political systems like that are completely unrepresentative of the people they are meant to represent. That's not just America, that's almost everywhere. And the extreme of my vision is, of course, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, where in my vision of a parliamentary democracy, there's lots of parties, they all come to agreements, etc. But of course, in the Knesset, it's two guys that are holding the entire rest of the country in the parliament to ransom, because Netanyahu can't afford to anger them, so he needs to toe the line with whatever they wish to do, which is an extreme anti-Palestinian stance at the moment. Okay, so where does this all lead us? Well, the only way for America to get out of the quagmire it's in many ways, is through a war or a natural catastrophe. Like I said, the debt will never be paid down. You can't, But if you've got a major war, just like World War I or World War II, where you reorganize the global structure, order, or World War II, again, reorganization of the global structure, those debts are either forgotten, forgiven. People that are owed to a debt, and you can start from scratch. The destruction is huge. There's a boom. I mean, after World War II, there was a massive boom in construction. We didn't get the same thing after World War I. because the destruction in World War I was largely battlefields, not so much cities and so forth. World War II was probably the first conflict where major population centers were completely destroyed. Completely. Dresden, firebombing, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the entire eastern Russian population displaced. Massive. I mean, we're talking like scorched earth here, right? That the Germans did horrific things in Eastern Russia, Western Russia. Sorry, excuse me, in Western Russia. East from the German point of view, so Western Russia. It was horrific. It was horrific. So we are living, in my mind, on borrowed time, and we don't have anybody right now in the world, in world politics, that is a statesman or a stateswoman enough to steer the ship in the right direction. And I don't see anyone willing enough to do it. Okay, so my suggestion is prepare yourself in any way possible, because what is coming is going to be real, and when things go sideways, they go sideways quickly, very, very fast. My grandparents as well as my parents lived through World War I and World War II. In World War II, my grandmother had the privilege or misfortune to be running away from the Russians on a bicycle with 4 children, a 14-year-old girl down to a 1-year-old boy, and everything they had was on that bike, and they kept running. And lost everything. My family lost everything a couple times over. The wars were not good to us. Yeah. But my point is, things do go sideways very, very fast. Just be mindful of that. And the conditions that we have now are the combination of conditions between before World War I and before World War II. With that, peace out, and I hope you have a very uneventful life. I hope you have a very uneventful life.